Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
We have this real treasury of nonviolence teachings.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushebush in New York City.
From Tolstoy to Gandhi to Abraham Joshua Heschel, the strands of our faiths that recognize we are actually more powerful together when we are standing nonviolently, even against the most terrifying displays of violence.
Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer and I recorded this week's show a few days before the nationwide No Kings 2 protest defending American democracy. You're hearing it after that enormous action. But whatever lessons millions of Americans learned taking to the streets of our towns and cities on October 18th, one thing is sure, the struggle continues. And the cornerstone role for religion in this moment, just like in so many others in our history, will only grow. Keep listening for an inspiring, empowering, and informative conversation on this edition of The State of Belief. We need these voices to be heard now more than ever. Make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Taking a minute to do these things really helps other people discover our show and become listeners and participants in American democracy and religion as well. Our library of past conversations includes over 150 amazing conversations with guests like Bishop William Barber, Maggie Siddiqui, Congressman Jamie Raskin, and many others. You can help grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution right now. Find out how at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Before we get started, here's something I wanted to get on your radar, and it's a bit of good news. I was just down in Atlanta, and it's another place that I admire so much of the great work that goes on down there, the incredible history of religious organizing, and not only the Black church, but all the different religious communities are there doing amazing work. I had a chance to meet with many of them. And I'm very proud to announce that the Georgia Interfaith Center for Public Policy has decided to affiliate with Interfaith Alliance. And our affiliates are people on the ground doing amazing work who get to decide their own priorities, but who want to be in a communion, in a wider connection with a nationwide group that will connect what's going on in Georgia with what's going on in Louisville, with what's going on in Boise, Idaho. And today we're talking to Reverend Chloe Breyer, who's the head of Interfaith Center of New York City, which is a big, important, august organization here in New York City, who is also just affiliated with Interfaith Alliance. So I guess if those of you who are maybe feeling alone, feeling like this is a difficult moment, and it is, there's also incredible organizing happening, people coming together, understanding that we need one another, understanding that we can reach out and be connected. And so I just encourage you to reach out to Interfaith Alliance. See if there's a local Interfaith Alliance near you or some other amazing group that you can be a part of so that you don't feel alone. And one of the reasons I love doing this is I hope that you feel connected to me because I'm really reaching out to you. And so I hope as listeners, you're really feeling the love from me and Interfaith Alliance. And hopefully we can continue to grow these ties that bind, as they say. And I think that's what will help preserve, expand, and save our democracy in this difficult moment. And now to my guest. For 18 years, she's been leading the Interfaith Center of New York, the most religiously diverse and civically engaged network of grassroots and immigrant religious leaders across the 5 boroughs of New York City. Ordained in the Episcopal tradition, Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer has also been a priest at St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Harlem since 2011. As a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, she has participated in interfaith dialogues and humanitarian initiatives in countries such as Afghanistan and Iran. And Reverend Chloe serves as a clergy advisor on transition teams for New York City's mayor and Manhattan district attorney. We've got so much to talk about, from the faith component of movements like No Kings to the growing relationships between the Interfaith Center of New York and Interfaith Alliance. I'm delighted to have Reverend Chloe Breyer joining us today on The State of Belief. Welcome, Chloe.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. This is really wonderful. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you because I've been, a fan for so long, and we've been friends, and now we're colleagues in the work, and I'm just so glad that we're going to be working so closely together. Let's start out by just acknowledging that for people hearing this, many of them will have gone to No Kings, as will have we. And I guess I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, from your perspective as a faith leader, as an organizer, what it means for faith to show up in public displays of peaceful, nonviolent protest in this moment. How does that feel for you as a religious leader?
I feel like it is really at the core of both my faith tradition as a Christian, where I recognize Christ as king, and that's the king in my life. And I think others would probably agree. But I think also from other faith traditions, we have this real treasury of nonviolence teachings, from Tolstoy to Gandhi to Abraham Joshua Heschel, the strands of our faiths that recognize we are actually more powerful together when we are standing nonviolently, even against the most terrifying displays of violence that we've really seen. So I hope that the kind of terrifying displays of militarized violence turned against our own people, as we saw in Chicago and in cities around the country, that we have the opportunity as communities of faith to acknowledge a higher power and a higher strength. Often people will look at the teachings of our faith traditions individually and say, well, those are good, but they don't stand up. How powerful are they really? And I think that as Americans and as leaders of different faith traditions, we have the tools, as it were, to be able to really have a kind of renaissance of nonviolence and the creative and powerful elements that are part of it, that we saw in the civil rights movement, we saw in India's independence movements. So this moment is ripe for that.
I agree completely. I think that this is actually a really important moment. This is something I'm kind of preaching about all over the place, is that people really do need to show up. And I do think this is an opportunity actually for us to exercise our faith traditions. And something that I've heard at these multi-faith Mondays that we're doing in Columbus Circle in New York City, someone was saying that, just repeated refrain was like, peace is not just the goal, it's also the means and the way we get to the goal. And as someone who is, has been part of the planning for No Kings, I pray that it has gone off when people are hearing this without any violence, because that was certainly the intention of all of us who were involved in the planning. And I do think it's at the core of a powerful, the idea that power that is inherent in this nonviolent resistance is really important. And we've seen that not only in this country, but in countries around the globe who have resisted authoritarian rule. The role of faith and the role of peaceful resistance has actually ultimately prevailed in many, many places. And so I think that we need to stand by that. I want to talk a little bit about you, and I want to talk about the Interfaith Center of New York. Why don't we start with you? You come from an interfaith background, so you are well situated personally to doing the work professionally that you are doing. Can you talk a little bit about your background and how you got inspired to do the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So I grew up in an academic family. At that time, my mom was a psychologist when I was growing up. My dad was a law professor, and that was before he went on the Supreme Court, and that certainly changed a lot in all our lives.
For
And
those of you who may not be tracking, Reverend Chloe Breyer is her father joined the court in what year?
1995.
1995. And so
Yeah.
Justice Breyer was an extremely important member of the court. Let's just take a moment with that because your life must have changed.
Well, yeah, but I mean, actually, in terms of my interfaith work, the impactful thing was that my mom, who was, Anglican, grew up in the Church of England, and my dad, who is Jewish, we got a little bit of each tradition. I was baptized in the Church of England as a child, and I think they thought somewhat open-mindedly that what was important was to have a faith tradition. So to me, it was a kind of normal thing to have Easter at church and then celebrate Passover because that happened as well. And, I in my own life feel that the pivotal time came for me actually more impactfully when I had a kind of conversion experience in Texas of all places, and really felt a calling to the ministry after that.
Can you say a little bit about that? I don't think I've ever even, you've written about this, but can you say a little bit for our listeners about like what that experience was that inspired that strong response?
Yeah. Visiting my college roommate in the Panhandle in Texas, we went to, the Texas Archaeological Society was having a dig, and so it was a lot of retirees, and I just got talking to a 92-year-old, lovely gentleman and his wife who was 87, and it turned out he had gone to Texas A&M and driven a whole lot of cattle over to what was then Peking, and become a missionary and went to, gosh, Princeton Theological Seminary, and then went back to China, where he walked between villages between the First and Second World War and spoke all sorts of dialects, and was an extraordinary kind of combination of scientific inquiry and curiosity with this deep faith. So it was the correspondence I had with him and his wife over many, many years before he died at age 100 that really kind of helped me with following a sense of calling. So that, and then, having grown up in a very kind of politically aware and family kind of brought those two things together. And what has been so wonderful about the Interfaith Center is that it really is at the crux of democratic engagement and religious diversity. And we really hold strongly, as do you, and as does the Interfaith Alliance, and as the reason that we have become a partner and affiliate, is that the strength of our civil society is dependent upon the vibrancy of interfaith work. And those, that Putnam talks about, those kind of nodules of voluntarism being at the heart of our democracy. Well, churches, mosques, and temples are included there and are very much anchors of that thing that we call civil society that makes us,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. And I love that story. And it does occur to me this interesting sense of call, which it's always so mysterious. And, for me, it was just like, oh my God, are you kidding? But anyway, like I do appreciate the being raised in a strongly academic and also socially aware household and being from an interfaith family. The Brandeis side of my family is the closest cousins I have. We spent a lot of time. And so having this sense of like, I need everyone. There was never any sense of like kind of Christian supremacy or any of that like we just didn't travel in that in that those ideas, which is one of the reasons I think probably both of us resist so strongly this kind of white Christian nationalism, which feels like such a threat to the democracy that we both hold dear. I've been writing this biography of my grandmother, which I can't wait to share with you, who, when her father went on the court, all of a sudden she became a bold-faced name. I'm not sure that happened with you quite the same way, but all of a sudden, like, where she was going, to school, where she was going on vacation became like front page news. It was very strange, and I'm sure she never really followed it. It was just, in doing research over, I was like, oh, that's so funny. Like, Miss Brandeis is going to, so-and-so. And did that feel strange to you to all of a sudden feel like more under a microscope because of your father's position, or?
No, not so much. I mean, I think that, my dad is usually confused with David Souter. So there isn't the same kind of.
That's a very modest idea, but okay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so and I think we were all he's been tremendously supportive of what all my sister and brother and I have been doing, and likewise, we think that both what he does in terms of his dedication to the law and to the principles behind the law, and also my mother in terms of her work with psychology, with healing essentially of people in need. It just seems to have gone along. I mean, there hasn't.
I love it. I love that there's a normalcy around it, and that I think is also really, really cultivated, and I really appreciate that. You have been for 18 years now at the Interfaith Center of New York. And Interfaith Center of New York, for people who don't know about it, is a very important institution in New York City, and actually is like a flagship. New York, it's located in New York, but it really represents a great approach to interfaith work that has national recognition. Can you talk a little bit about the Interfaith Center of New York, how it was founded, why it was founded, and then let's get into some of the current work that you're doing?
Sure. So we were founded in 1997 by the former dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, which is an Episcopal cathedral here in New York. When he left the cathedral, with the idea that we would continue to embrace or be a place of interfaith work way before it was sort of fashionable. He had used when had been at the cathedral for about 25 years, and had invited Shinto priests to celebrate tea ceremonies on the altar, much to the perplexity of most of the Episcopalians in New York. And he had then, celebrated like Native American Thanksgiving and really put the St. Francis Day blessing of the animals on the map. So had this incredible imagination and vision for what interfaith could be, which at that time and with him really revolved around the arts and worship. And so in our early days, we were kind of like a little bit of a mini cathedral, but in a loft on 30th Street. Eventually, after 9/11, the focus became more towards a community organizing model of who are the grassroots and immigrant faith leaders of New York City, because this is really what makes the city tick. And not only are they critical for the, largely many of them are new New Yorkers, and faith leaders are so pivotal as people seek to, come, as we've seen in the last 2.5 years too, as well, adjust to life in the city or survive in the city alongside, shoulder to shoulder with communities that have been here for a very long time. So that is the way we kind of pivoted, with a special focus on fighting Islamophobia after 9/11, and doing so with pressure and education with the NYPD, recognizing in those first 10 years after the radicalization report happened, that was so devastating in terms of equating Islam with radicalization, how much reform was needed at the NYPD. And we saw that really begin to happen towards 2015, 2016, with a bunch of lawsuits about all sorts of things. And then after that, we really worked more closely in education, and developed a video that was shown to everybody at the police academy that kind of profiled 5 or 4 of the world religious traditions that the cops might misinterpret on the ground. It was kind of like a 101 Sikhism, 101, Orthodox Judaism, 101 Islam, and really featuring the vast, like, ethnic and national diversities of these traditions in New York City. So that's kind of that's how we've come along, so we come a long way, and here we are.
Yeah. Up next, much more with Reverend Chloe Breyer. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushebush. My guest is Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer, Executive Director of Interfaith Center of New York. I think right now, especially given what's happening around the country with, immigrants being, singled out and, the lack of due process. And I am curious, how you are viewing this, seeing what's happening in Chicago, knowing that New York is almost certainly on the map soon. How do you understand the role of faith leaders in working with immigrants? There's working with the faith leaders from immigrant communities, but there's also the Episcopal Church, my tradition, which is American Baptist, which is an old Baptist tradition. We should also be aware of some of what is being mobilized against immigrant communities and figuring out what to do. I do think that this is going to be really important. And I know that across the country, we are seeing amazing faith leaders show up in, voicing dissent against ICE and trying to walk alongside immigrants when they're going to their mandated, meetings at court. I'm curious what your experience has been, because this is already happening in New York City.
There's a lot of fear. There's also a lot of potential, because we had to build up these extraordinary networks which span, our office to mosques in the Bronx that have been the address for many people coming up from the southern border via, starting in Sierra Leone or starting in Senegal, and have making that trip. So they are now on WhatsApp groups, and they are, when something goes down, like the government did this last weekend, you have to pay $100 or your asylum petition is going to go out the window, and you have 3 days to do it. And we haven't even set the format up on the website. There's a lot of sharing in those networks.
It's really almost like, at this point, immigrant communities, as not only the fear, but being set up to fail. When you have court dates that are being set, and then you show up to do the right thing. This is what just boggles the mind. And I think this is where kind of all of us who are maybe lay people to the current state of immigration, or how to understand it, but people doing the right thing, showing up to their court dates which are mandated, and, which are the path that they're supposed to take, and they're getting abducted from there. It just feels like you're just trying to create lawlessness by creating fear.
We need everyone to be able to solve crimes. We need everybody to be, not afraid to come as a witness to a trial. We need everybody to know that the courts are there for them.
Yeah, it's terrible. Now, you've been part of there has been some faith activity down because we have an ICE detention center in New York City. And I mention all of this not to make New York the center of this conversation. All cities are going through this. New York is not special. I think what I'm, accessing here with Reverend Chloe is that, we have an organization like the Interfaith Center of New York that is really active, but you and colleagues of yours have been, aware of this ICE detention center and trying to do something about the conditions there. And can you talk a little bit about any of the actions that you all have been taking?
Yeah, I can certainly do that, and I want to just also when mention one more thing about these networks,
Yes.
which is often we think we as faith community members are, serving immigrant New Yorkers, but often they are us, and that was clear, a couple of weeks ago when a woman who is desperately trying to stop her husband being abducted in front of their two children was just forcibly, pushed to the ground gratuitously by an ICE officer who had apparently done things like that before. And that person was the parishioner of one of the people in our network, St. Peter's Lutheran in the City Core building, and they were desperate for psychological help for the kids who had witnessed that.
Yeah.
So just like these are us, like people, and I think that's really important for our all of our networks to remember and
Yeah.
do. When it
100%.
comes yeah, when it comes to, actions, there are 2 things that come to mind. The first actually didn't take place in New York City, it took place in New Jersey, because actually the closest big detention center to New York is in New Jersey, in Newark. Delaney, a building that is built, we saw, um, because it has no occupancy permit or none of the basic requirements that a building that houses human beings is supposed to have. And because it is in a alley that is so filled with chemical, exhaust and across the street from what we think is a place where meat carcasses are disposed of. The smells there are just unbelievable. We've been part of a presence outside run by Pax Christi, Faith in New Jersey, that is like a daily presence with family members who are forced in the 2 or 3 hours that they have to visit loved ones to sit outside in the driveway in all times of basically the day, in all sorts of weather. What we were talking about at the very beginning of this had to do with the power of nonviolence, and I have an amazing, actually, illustration that comes from, faith presence outside that detention center. We sat outside blocking both gates at one point, all these New Jersey, faith leaders did, and, for maybe 6 hours or 5 or 6 hours, no one knew what to do with us. Like, cars, like, came from the inside of the facility as if they were going to masked ICE officers, like, lurked in a very threatening way, but actually no one they then went around the other side and did the same thing. It was amazing because the only thing that they really know how to deal with is force. So of course, as soon as someone got up and started, behaving in a threatening way, somebody else who actually wasn't a faith leader, but that's all right. We that was when we got a response. And likewise, when we walked in another occasion, we walked from one part of the vigil across to another part of another gate, singing a bunch of ourselves, faith leaders and lovely old ladies with white hair from Pax Christi. We saw the ice guard just pushing the gate closed, like really quickly as he could. And that was just in response to a bunch of people walking and singing. Might have been like a handful of people. Anyway, it just
Yeah.
is like you
No,
get
right.
the
It's like,
eyes.
it's very interesting. It's a different, it's in its own way. It's like, it's very intimidating because they don't know what to do. And I think it's very effective also for public opinion, but also, to recognize that we're here and we're watching and we're aware. And that's like, it's a witness as well as, an effort to change things. So I think it's just so important.
So the trick I think is combining, and that was true with a group of people who were also arrested that included faith leaders, like myself and some others at 26 Federal Plaza.
Which is
where
in Manhattan. It's
which
downtown
is in
Manhattan.
Manhattan,
Yeah.
which says it's not a detention center, but actually has kept people, has it's been subject to a judge's ruling that they can't hold people there anymore because the conditions have been so abysmal. I mean, 200 people and no beds, nothing, no access to lawyers, no access to a phone call, up to 36 days in one case, no, in another case, no sanitary napkins provided. Like just horrible on the 10th floor. So that was where this civil disobedience took place. And I think what's going to be hard and what is the real challenge for us is the strategy behind these, because it's one thing to have a kind of isolated act of nonviolent resistance, but where King and the civil rights movement were so critical was that they had strategy as to where and when they
Mm.
did those things. And there was
Mm.
always like a concrete goal. And I feel like that's where we need to do a bit of learning, particularly when we're up against something as expansive as what we're facing right now.
Yeah, I think that that's so important, and I also think, we last week we offered. I was talking to Adam Friedman, who's our colleague, who was really talking about what it meant to do kind of the different kinds of nonviolent protests, some of which involve non-cooperation and potential arrests, but not all have to involve that. And I do
No,
think
that's
that
right.
the more that the more that like all of us feel like we know what it means to show up with, intelligently and with commitment and with strategy. I love the fact that you're mentioning that. I think, I would love to see, frankly, hundreds of thousands of people getting trained in this kind of nonviolence, this discipline, this spiritual discipline of nonviolence that I think will be a powerful force, because I do think that's what will be required to deal with what we're going to be confronted with. Talk a little bit more about some of the other programs that, the Interfaith Center has done so much for faith communities, but also, what does it mean for different faith communities to come together and to begin to weave a fabric of understanding? I think that that's another piece. Like we could do a lot just within our own faith tradition, but reaching across difference, especially right now when there's so much invested in keeping people separate, keeping people suspicious, keeping people afraid. Like what part of that work do you find most rewarding?
Well, I can say that the we have a kind of a bread and butter program. In fact, we're taking applications for it now for something called the Interfaith Civic Leadership Academy Fellowship, and that is for an emerging group of diverse faith leaders that includes ordained and lay leaders from every tradition you can imagine. This being New York City, and about 9 months together, we meeting on a weekly basis, meeting with you know community organizing trainers, meeting from with people from the city, meeting with advocates and others that are helping to them to kind of get more literate in the work of advocating for your community in New York City, and not just your community, but for the city itself, things that will benefit those beyond your community. And that is what we think makes a powerful faith leader here in the city. And I think you would probably agree with that too. Someone who's literate in the language of the pulpit, right? The primary language that talk about on the Sabbath on Saturday, or the on and in church on Sunday, and also can go out into the public square, be it at Columbus Circle, be it at City Hall, be it in the front of 26 Federal Plaza, and understand that your faith has the ability to translate itself into a diverse democracy, and that
Mm,
is actually a really great discipline for all of us to know. Um,
yes.
and then, it's not we're not all about being one, to be honest, because that's just not the approach. Sometimes we feel like the differences between our faith traditions are what is to be honored the most, because when we all think we're the same, that's when real problems happen.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you think exactly like I do. Yeah, I agree. I think that that's an exciting program. I like especially like really it's situational. So it's not pretending like you're in Idaho or that you're in Florida. You're in New York City. So what's required of you here, and who are the people to know here? I really the contextualization
Yeah,
of
there's a
the
great my colleague, Dr. Henry Goldschmidt, who runs our programs, is want to say that the sign of a faith community that's come into its own in New York City is that it has an exemption from alternate side parking for its holidays, or
ah
as a public school holiday for its holidays. So you
yeah,
began life with Christmas and maybe the Jewish holidays, and then gradually the one Eid and two Eids appeared on the scene, and now we
that's
have
right.
Diwali.
Yeah, I know it. It's fantastic. And it really because my kids are growing up in the public school system.
Of course, you know that.
And
So
so,
as a parent, maybe you don't think that's so exciting.
no, but I think it's fantastic because like right, when I was growing up, I was like no one ever said Diwali to me. Forget it. You know what I mean? But now my kids can say Diwali. They know well, for one, their best friend is Hindu. But also because that's just a day that the school isn't happening, but they talk about why and what's happening that day, and I think it's all fantastic. And so for you, like as you, I just want to go back to you personally, like,
Yeah.
you've shown up for these things, you've done all of this, you've gotten arrested, as you mentioned. Like, what is a spiritual, I don't know, what's a spiritual discipline that you exercise that, is really something that you lean into? Not that everyone who's listening will do the same thing, but rather to recognize that we do need to understand what works for ourselves. And is there something that works for you that really helps you get through difficult moments, especially in the kind of times that we're in now?
So, as we mentioned at the beginning, I'm a Episcopal priest. So, to me, the Book of Common Prayer is the source of nourishment, and in particular, there's a short form of morning prayer. And I use that. I try to do it on a daily basis, and because I live sort of near Central Park, I combine it with like a 15-minute walking meditation. And
Nice.
and that, is very, very, very helpful just in terms of, I guess, grounding for lack of a better word, but also reminding myself that, that I need God and in my life on a daily basis, and
Mm,
that is
mm.
really important. So,
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I love that so much that like loving the mandate to love God really is about like it's about that maintaining that connection in
yeah.
these kinds of moments, and it is like that is beautiful. And the idea of combining it with a walk in nature is like kind of all of those things. Here we are. We're in a really particular moment, like back to No Kings and back to the kind of what we're seeing come out of the White House, frankly. And you don't have to comment on this, but like I grew up revering the court, like because Brandeis was so very like
Mhm.
omnipresent in my household, and like it was like you know I thought, oh, the court, that's where like really great things will happen. And Representative Raskin like schooled me on that. He's a constitutional a law professor. He was like, the court has never saved us before. But I am like so I won't ask you like what you're thinking about the court, but I do think like, how do you understand this moment in terms of American history? And like, it feels different, not unprecedented in kind of some of the attacks on marginalized communities and other things, but it feels different. I'm 61 than anything I've experienced, where I'm just not sure actually what the future might hold. How are you understanding this moment in U.S. history?
Well, okay, the only thing that comes to mind, and it's so totally different, but in terms of like chaos and like life just being different than you ever thought it would be is the example of the Civil War. Like, I do think that is part of our history.
Hmm.
Like, and the fact that we survived that as a nation, like, the odds are just so slim. And arguably, if it hadn't been for Lincoln, like that one person, we wouldn't have survived it. We'd have either split and we'd have had a slaveholding country and another country that didn't have slaves. Like, in fact, that was a lot of the abolitionists were fine with that. Like, as long as it's not in our country.
Hmm.
But Lincoln's commitment to, on the one hand, what he was just, despised for, not at the beginning of his thing, being more supposedly concerned about the Union, which he was, to the extent that he wasn't, one of those calling for the immediate cessation of slavery at any cost. He did in his person held both the Union and the end of slavery together. Like, I don't know how that happened. I mean, just like kind of reading about him, and something like that has gotta get us through this moment. And the odds are it may not, but we have we've gone through extraordinary moments, and most importantly, out of that came, like, the emphasis is on equality, where there was, like, it all fell apart or whatever, but even in, like, the Gettysburg Address, this whole thing that hadn't been part of our Constitution's emphasis really came about. And, God knows, like, what will come about in this experiment of, like, a multi-faith, like, super diverse country trying to be a democracy.
Hmm.
It's it's crazy with all
Yeah.
the, like, horrible technology and environmental disaster also looming.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that that's a very realistic, but it's also a call, frankly, to moving forth with courage. And, that's one of the kind of calling the words that feels most important today. I'm curious what courage means to you. Like, how do you understand courage today?
Well, I can just tell you, like, in the week that led up to that thing at 26 Federal Plaza, like, a lot of us thought it was gonna be federal agents that were gonna do the arrest, and it was like a daily weight of just weight, like, weight is in heaviness,
Mm.
um, and it was like when that didn't happen, it was like a huge weight lifted off. So I don't know if that's a certain kind of courage, but I think courage can be just the daily weightiness of um of doing something that you are kind of aware has some risk associated with it.
Mm. Mm.
But there's also the courage to be honest, and that's sometimes more different. That's more difficult in some ways because you don't think it's courage, but the courage to, like, say something that you know isn't gonna be popular or that other people are gonna judge you for, that's another kind of courage, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Both of which can weigh on us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul, I just wanted to say though that the work that the other affiliates that you have that are doing around the country is so amazing. And it's really what came to mind when I was thinking of strategy, because they're in places where they're in some ways much more at the cutting edge of things. And like, I would be curious to know if there's a national strategy to be had, what would they be saying, people should be doing? Like,
Mm.
it's I
Yeah.
just was thinking of I was just thinking of your other affiliates.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really important, and I actually think that that's the genius behind the affiliate network is that strategies are contextually based, but also we can learn from one another, and that's actually a big idea for many of the affiliates is that we see what's coming. In part, we see what's coming because it's happening in your state already.
Right.
Um, and then I think that, what we're also interested in is what is a national strategy, especially as we as we deal with the kind of threat of authoritarianism right now, and how do we name that clearly, and how do we organize religious communities to respond to it? So I appreciate that. The Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer is Executive Director of the Interfaith Center of New York. She's the author of a memoir titled The Close, A Young Woman's First Year at Seminary. And her writing appears in Slate, New York Daily News, and the International New York Times. Chloe, I'm looking forward to doing so much work with you in the future.
It's so exciting.
And thank you for being with us today on The State of Belief.
Thank you. Thank you.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion? Please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to keep growing The State of Belief. Please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushebush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.